Okay, we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. My name's Katie Kross. I'm Managing Director of the Center for Energy Development and the Global Environment here at the Fuqua School of Business. And I am really excited to moderate our next panel, which I think is going to tie together a lot of the themes that we've already been hearing a lot about this morning. So when we talk about microgrids, electric vehicles, distributed energy resources, new energy technologies coming on to the grid, and talk about the utility of the future, a lot of that discussion is predicated on advancement in digital applications that are going to enable all of that to be possible. So we're going to be talking about energy plus digital technologies. I will make a short note that there's also a lot of digital innovation happening in the oil and gas sector, as some of you know, which is enabling a lot of efficiency in that sector. Given our panelists here today, we are going to focus primarily on the electric power sector, but know that the digitization of energy covers, the entire energy spectrum, not just the power sector. So we have a lot to cover. It's a big topic in terms of what digitization means for the electric power sector. I think that covers everything from the new net metered system that was just installed on my house to enable my solar panels to sell power back to the grid when I'm not using it, to this far off sort of rosy future that we imagine, where we are going to have our cars plugged in and our microgrids and our Internet of Things, and all of our appliances and vehicles are going to be talking to the grid, and it's all going to be perfectly optimized to balance the production and consumption of energy at exactly the right moment in the future. So there's a lot to talk about in terms of how do we get to that future, what the barriers are, and what are the technologies that are going to enable that future. So I'm going to start. I'm just going to ask each one of our panelists here to introduce himself. Just tell us a little bit about your organization, your role as it relates to this sort of digital topic, and then we'll jump right into some questions.
Should I start?
Yes, please, Debanjan.
Sorry about my throat. So my name is Debanjan Chakraborty. I'm a senior manager with Accenture. So Accenture, as many of you would know, it's a global management consulting company and also a professional services firm. It's a $40 billion company with over 450,000 people across the globe. So it has got 5 different distinct business lines: strategy, consulting, digital technology, and operations. I actually come from the strategy side of the house. And there my focus is technology strategy. So I work with corporations to enhance the value of IT and also reposition IT to steer the company through their digital aspirations.
Excellent.
Hi, my name is Mike Morley. I work for ScottMadden. It's a general management consulting firm based here in Raleigh and an office in Atlanta. We do primarily work in the energy sector. And my role, since I graduated Fuqua, has been mainly just general operations consulting in energy, but more recently have worked on several digital transformation projects, because it's, I think one of the, as evidenced by the fact that we're having this panel, you kind of can't talk about your operations anymore without understanding the technology underpinning. So a lot of projects recently in that space.
Hi, I'm Greg Myers. I work for Sensus. Sensus is a local company. We're headquartered right here in Raleigh. We have about 650 folks working here in the Raleigh area, 1,600 worldwide, but we're part of a much larger company that you might have heard of as well, which is Xylem, which has about 16,000 employees. Combined, we work in the utility industry and work with communities to provide solutions to help drive towards the digitization of everything that they would need. We work with college campuses and so forth on smart solutions, as well as different cities around the country and really around the world.
Yeah, I'm Jim Musilek. I'm with the North Carolina Electric Membership Corporation. I'm the director of Grid Modernization. My background is really in the power business, but I really work with our distribution co-ops to help them implement new technologies, new programs to take advantage of those technologies. The distribution co-ops, I don't know how many folks are familiar with the co-ops in North Carolina, but we're a not-for-profit electric utility. There's 26 individual distribution co-ops in the state, and we deliver power to mostly rural electric consumers. If you guys have been in the mountains or down to the beach, you've probably been on a co-op line. And I'm really excited about the conversations that took place earlier today, because the co-ops are doing everything that has been discussed. We have 2 microgrids right now that are in place. We have indoor agriculture. I think we definitely have legal indoor
Illegal.
but there may be some illegal that I don't know about. But we're very aggressive right now in our EV strategy, and we're pursuing a lot of beneficial electrification efforts right now. So it's looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. So I guess I just want to start to sort of set the stage for our audience, and I'll start with maybe Mike and Jim, but anyone can jump in on this. Can you just talk through a little bit about sort of the current state of the digitization? You know, we've been hearing for a long time the smart grid is coming, so how smart really is the grid at this point, and maybe what's the horizon for the implementation of this smart grid that we've been hearing about?
Sure, I can start off. I think, you know, there have been some of the big macro forces kind of driving some of the changes to, you know, the assets and the technology that's needed to make this smart grid happen. But what you find, at least what we find a lot, is that the operations and the processes that support both the implementation of those technologies as well as the use of those technologies and understanding how it fits in and makes something that was previously not smart, smart is the area that is lagging right now. So, you know, you'd see, for instance, a utility that they've gone forward and, you know, they've done a great job of implementing AMI, but they haven't yet hired the data scientists to understand what to do with the data, nor have they built the data platform to understand how they capture, transform, and just develop insights from that data, which then feed back into the way that they manage their processes differently and inform you know, how they do things in a more smart way. So, you know, in terms of how we move forward there, I think a lot of it is on the technology platforms that help, you know, enable the implementation of these smart assets, as well as changing the operations and a smarter workforce for the utilities to implement them.
Yeah, I think that, you know, if you ask, so I'm representing a utility, and I think most utilities would say that the grid has been pretty smart for a long time. You know, power plants and transmission systems have had a lot of very, you know, sophisticated technology in them for years, for really decades. But as we go from the centralized generation down to the distribution, to the edge of the grid, we have evolved. I mean, it's constantly evolving. So right now we're in a place where we're having distribution automation put out on the distribution system so that there's self-healing grids. We have AMI systems that we're pulling lots of data on. And you think about it, back in the day, you would get 1 meter read for the whole month. You know, now we're getting a meter read every hour. So you're going from one set of data per month to, you know, 744 units of data. So having the ability to do that analysis is super important. But the grid is, I think the grid is smart right now, but it is evolving more, because the discussions that took place earlier about the Internet of Things, that's the part that we're trying to work on now. You know, the utility systems are pretty sophisticated. They have a lot of fiber and communications deployed, so they're able to do a lot of stuff on the distribution system. But bringing in the digital component, the IoT, the edge of grid, the consumer components, that's what we're working on now. I think 5 to 10 years from now, we're going to see a completely different distribution system, and as far as managing it. Right now, we just put out an RFP for a Durham system, a distributed energy resource management system, and one of the challenges is no one really builds these things. So we are definitely plowing new ground. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, it'll look a lot different.
So I'd just like to add, I've been involved for a lot of years in this industry, like 27 years. I started when I was 10. And what I've seen is, utilities really went from every couple months of getting a meter read to being able to get it monthly. Here in the Raleigh area, there was a drive-by system. They're able to get a monthly read that essentially just told them, here's my meter read, and here's if anybody's tampered with it, or those kind of things. Now they're putting smart meters in that gives them a whole lot more information. Now, they are just now transitioning to that type of system, but many of the folks that first adopted the AMI, Advanced Metering Infrastructure, during the era where they got the federal funding, that was the first time that they had ever automated. And so they were really happy to just get the cash register working, and they were getting hourly data, sometimes 15 minutes data, but they're really only using it for billing purposes. They're now at the point in their, what I would call day two, where they now know they have all of this additional data, and they're trying to make more use of it. And for companies like ours and my colleagues here, it's a great challenge, but it is a challenge in that now their thirst for analytics to do something with that data and help them utilize it to make the grid smarter and provide more analytics is a good challenge for us to have right now.
So let's talk a little bit more about that data. We've heard these studies that consumers spend 7 minutes a year thinking about their their energy bill, right? How much of that data that we now have access to are consumers actually wanting to do something with? And this, just anyone who would like to comment on that.
So there's been a lot of trial and error as far as trying to drive consumer behavior based around giving them more data and seeing how that might change. Where it's fallen down is the fact that the rate structures haven't really driven folks to change their behavioral habits, right? I mean, we all, if we get an alert, are we going to go, adjust our thermostat and so forth? Where that's really going to change is how the utilities can help drive data to be able to help them use their own kind of home automation, where they automatically set things up to drive those behavioral things, and they set it up and they sort of set and forget kind of things. And Amazon is diving deep into this. We're working with them on programs that would allow you to be able to tell, stop charging my electric car, or to turn my heat down to this kind of thing, trying to drive it to that that type of scenario. Utilities for years have tried to get inside the home. There was a Zigbee craze for a long time. Out of the AMI meters that are deployed today, 2/3 of them have a Zigbee chip in them that are supposed to communicate inside the house, but there's only a handful of deployments that ever utilize that functionality, and that's because utilities aren't used to going inside of the home. But what they need to do is be able to enable those folks to do something with that data.
Debanjan, you work with a lot of utility sector clients, so can you talk through?
So yeah, a little bit, to extent of what Greg was talking about. If you look at the AMI business case for any major utility, you'd see more than 30% or sometimes more than 40% value is actually calculated based on the demand response kind of programs. So I don't think we're there yet. If you look across the country, there are many major utilities who are yet to adopt demand response. But then in terms of the data, data is the new DNA. It is the spine of every major business model which are coming, in the mainstream now. So from the utility standpoint, you can do a lot. You can do, you can manage your asset life cycle. You can use it for, for modernizing your grid or enabling some of the business functions to do with your grid. But then from the customer standpoint, there are new business models coming up which are beyond the electron business models. And with the data, the ability to look at your usage on a daily basis, around the clock, you can you can save power, you can save energy, and also it will enable you to participate in many of those new business models.
So that all sounds very rosy. So what are the barriers to this? What are the holdups to the application of both the data analytics and the digital technologies, moving the grid forward faster?
So this is my point of view. I think we are going to get there, but then in the current world, the technology innovation is moving in a much faster pace than process innovation. So you can take the example of blockchain, just for the sake of argument. It is at the height of its expectation. People are talking about what blockchain cannot do, really, right? It's going to fall to the trough because there is not much of adoption. People talk about you can use blockchain for smart contract, for EV stations. So you can do transactive grid, pricing transactions. But then those business models are yet to come up to speed. They are yet to come to the mainstream. So there is a lag. Same with data. I think, as AI and machine learning and all utilities understand the value that they capture, from these new technologies, as they are going to come to the mainstream, there's an immense potential to leverage data. But then again, you need data because you want to enable a certain process, a certain business model. And I think that the utilities are still navigating through that process. So to answer your question, the barriers, I think it is mostly the inertia of rest, the regulatory aspects of things. So the future will emerge, and we'll see, what happens.
Yeah, and just to add one piece to that around the understanding what the business capability model is for the entity that's using the data. I think a lot of times what we see are these silos between the operators and the technologists at the firm that we're working with, and oftentimes the decisions are made without talking to each other on here are our inputs, our use cases on what we need this technology to do, and vice versa. Here's how you need to change your processes to incorporate this technology. So we've worked with several utilities lately, and particularly with a lot of RTOs that have these. A good example is these synchro phasers that have been installed, right? Equipment that can help predict outage and allow the operator to take evasive action to make sure that doesn't happen. The data is collected, transmitted, sent, stored, and not processed at all, and not used by a lot. So that is an example where, if you were to break down what is the business capability that we're trying to enable, right? It's outage prediction, right? And then how do we do outage prediction? And then linking the technologies there, I think you start to create this network effect. But without it, it's tough to get adoption, and it's tough to actually get it implemented.
If I can just add one thing. We're talking about the data and the interface with the consumer. I think the data is really sort of the raw material to develop the business case or to develop the value. And the one anecdotal story I'll tell you is we did a grid-enabled water heater pilot from 2017 through 2018, and we were looking at data from water heaters, every 5 seconds when we were putting them in control. And one of the things we discovered was we could tell when these tanks were leaking, and we could tell when the electrodes, on the electric resistance water heater needed to be replaced. So, there was a business case there of something to provide value to the consumer. And there's just so much data available to us now. We really do need to take that as a raw material and try to understand how we can develop it into different types of services or products for end-use consumers.
Are there any transformational enablers, either in policy or in business model innovation, that you think that would advance the adoption of digital technologies in the power space faster?
So before I answer that question directly, so let me just talk about what is really changing this industry, right? So there are three major strategic themes, if you will. The decarbonization, decentralization, and democratization, 3Ds. These three are the strategic forces that is transforming or twisting the industry. Now, in terms of technology, right, people can talk about different things, and they're all in their own evolutionary phase or cycle. But then there are three types of technologies which are going to evolve. One is the assistive intelligence. It could be AI, it could be the machine learning, deep learning, and so on, and also the intelligent things like robot, like the drone. Utilities are saving a lot of money using drone now. Second, the experience technologies that you can, that you can use to, make the experience more immersive. Extended reality and IIoT. That enables digital twin and all, and also the connected mesh. Right now you have got blockchain, which might, get to its own adoption point and all that. And beneath that, you have this tremendous, computing horsepower and data, that's going to enable all of these different things. Now, to the point of policy, right? You do have the technology in place. You do have the foundational elements in place. I briefly mentioned that policy is also a barrier, although the clear mandate of many of the regulators now, and Jim can probably talk more about this, is that you have to go this certain route, but then yet your customer-facing metrics do not align with the way you authorize your utility revenue return, the authorized rate of return, right? So recently, for example, there is a mandate that came in Hawaii. They call that, performance-based rate making. So they are linking the utility revenue with some of the metrics like your interconnection to the customer-cited technologies like, residential battery or, solar, rooftop solar, and so on. So I think these policies need to be propagated, further, across the nation to incent the utility companies to drive, these technologies and these business models much more. So you have the foundation, you have the computing, you have got everything. It is just the adoption, and that has to be, in a way, supported, by all these different policies.
Excellent. Anyone else?
Yeah, just one other thing to add. I think a lot of the clients that we see, the issues that we see are, they're trying to adopt a point solution and tack it on to a dinosaur IT system that really needs to be revitalized and built in a way that is modular, extensible, scalable. And so until you take the plunge and build that, it's difficult to just keep stitching on, a new application that's designed to run in a continuous delivery and with DevOps. Until you build the platform that allows you to do that, you end up continuing to lag behind the adoption of these technology changes. But it's not easy to just go do that, right? There's a lot of steps involved in that process. So that's one of the other things that we see is you see an Amazon and the Googles and the companies that innovate the most aggressively, and they have that platform, right? They have that capability, whereas a lot of the utilities, the wholesale market operators, they're just still trying to figure out what that means.
You're talking about barriers of forgetting digital technology. So speaking from a rural cooperative perspective, the thing that is lacking in the rural parts of North Carolina and in the country in general is broadband in the rural parts of the state. And we're talking about all this digital technology, and if the folks don't have access to it, it's going to make it a challenge to get those types of devices out there. So I think that's just one thing that is definitely a barrier. Like I said, in 5 to 10 years, we may see a lot of changes in that area.
So I was just on the break reading an article. The headline was about an AI application that promises to boost power plant profitability by 20%, which obviously would be huge for the industry. Can you all just talk about which of the, amidst all the headlines of the promises of the technology transforming the energy sector, which ones are actually likely to have the most sort of meaningful impact on profitability, on efficiency in the sector?
I think, go ahead.
Good.
Okay, short answer. So I think it is definitely data analytics, but then you can argue that data analytics has been a pretty old notion. The thing is that, for many companies, even now, they have got descriptive analytics. They produce reports out of data. That's going to go up to, predictive and more, prescriptive analytics. And eventually, you can use the same data for your machine learning, deep learning, and artificial intelligence. So I think this whole stream, analytics through AI, through machine learning, they have got tremendous value proposition for utilities, especially machine learning. I would say you can also use machine learning for self-healing, for smart grid and all that, which is slightly beyond even data.
I was going to say, to me, it's, from enabling all of these distributed energy resource applications, it's battery storage and getting to the level and cost effectiveness that it needs to be. You mentioned that you have solar. There are, in North Carolina, the solar incentives have gone away, right? And so I know folks that have, and I've talked to utilities that have folks that call them and say, hey, I thought I was going to save all this money on my utility bill, but I'm paying $150 a month to the solar company for the equipment. I'm still paying you $150 a month for my utility bill. I thought that was going away. Well, the problem is that there's no ability to store that energy, and it's still the utility's job to make sure that every consumer is still getting the quality of service that they need, and to enable some of those technologies, especially on a more local community level, and battery storage has to get to a stage that is cost effective.
Excellent. So, cost-efficient batteries, we're all hoping for. Are there other technologies that are on the horizon that maybe they're not commercializable yet, but something maybe far off that you've got your eye on?
So I think quantum computing could be one of those for sure, right? I mean, it's still in a very nascent stage. IBM sort of, not IBM, yeah, IBM, also Google actually. They're working on it, but then it is going to be a major disruptor going forward. I probably shouldn't use the word disruptor. It will be very loose, but it's going to enable your data-related models in a much more powerful way. And also, it's going to probably disrupt a few technologies like blockchain. Blockchain, for example, right? It's a great, technology, but then it does have an, Achilles heel. That is, it is based on, very standard cryptographic functions. And then when you have quantum computing, that's going to disrupt that because you can break those cryptographic algorithms very easily with quantum computing. So then probably you're going to have some other type of blockchain. So yeah, so quantum computing could be one of those, definitely.
Excellent. Anyone else have thoughts?
And just to piggyback on that, we're working with a consortium of wholesale market operators, and they're trying to work with General Electric, who's the primary market designer in terms of the software that runs it, and figure out how to break down the problems in different ways. So for instance, I think the majority of the analytics and the compute power is needed to solve the day-ahead market. That's where the majority of prices are set. That's where you have the most constraints. There are very strict timelines and windows by which these wholesale market operators need to solve the market. And there are a lot more inputs than there used to be. And there are a lot more constraints than there used to be when you think about new FERC storage orders with more participation allowed, continued evolution towards lower levels of participation requirements. You see what's going on in New York with REV, with moving that even potentially to the distribution level. So you start looking at what needs to go into this pipeline to get computed, and it becomes pretty evident that you need to solve the problem in a different way. So whether you look at parallel optimization or distributed optimization, you need to change the algorithms and you need to change the hardware on which it runs. So I think from the wholesale market perspective, that's a big challenge that we're dealing with right now.
Excellent.
Can I give a non-technical answer? Sure. You think about game changers. Mm-hmm. I think consumer expectations, that's the one thing that's in the mix in all this is You know, our company, we're really in the business of providing service to end-use consumers, and as consumers' tastes change and needs change, we're going to really need to be able to adapt to those changes, and there'll be a technological solution, but we're going to need to be really sort of, someone said earlier, fail fast and pivot. We're definitely going to need to, the utilities are going to have to change how they think about things, because it's going to be a different world. So that was just one thought I had when we were talking about this.
Greg, you have a favorite technology future?
I would say
Fuel
it's something that's starting to become more thought about in my industry as far as serving utilities with communications and sensors and metrology kind of things, is the ability to be able to support the changing grid. Grid was developed to deliver bulk generation power one way, and now the grid has all of these other inputs coming into it, from distributed energy resources, microgrids, solar, all these things that now the utility has to manage in more of a circular fashion in how they're going to keep the levels that they're delivering to the consumer at the levels at the same quality they've always had. You talk about Hawaii and all of the solar that Hawaii has. Well, during the peak of the day, their voltage levels will be around 125. When the sun goes down, their voltage levels drop to 114. If a cloud comes over, their voltage levels drop. So it's being able to manage all of that in the grid and still be able to provide the same level of service to their customers. There's also issues with safety and outages when those occur, and you got energy coming back on the grid, and you've got line workers out there trying to work on it. So there are all these things that utilities are thinking about to be able to service that. So they're looking at technologies. We're developing technologies that allow utilities to be able to make more of those decisions on the grid edge and be able to act on those things at the grid edge versus bringing all the data back for a centralized decision-making process and then sending controls back down. Now, there are still things that you'll do that with, but to be able to have that capability on the edge of the grid where everything's happening is going to be very important.
Great. So got a couple of questions from our audience here. This one's interesting, and I'm not sure who will have a perspective on it, but do you see digital technologies facilitating more opportunities for deregulated energy markets in the U.S.?
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Interesting question.
I was going to say I do, in that because the utility model is changing, they're becoming more, and some of the, there's been initiatives in many states to drive towards utilities becoming distribution service providers. And that means that they're in charge of how power gets delivered to every home, but they're not in charge necessarily of where that energy comes from. And so driving toward that kind of model enables more players to be able to sell energy into that market as it becomes cost effective for private providers to be able to develop and build and invest in alternative resources. But it drives the utility model differently, right? Because they're forever they've been used to being able to charge for every kilowatt and everything they deliver. That's how they've made money, capital assets and those kind of things. And now the model's changing, where now they're not getting the kilowatt hour charge. So how do you continue to fund that piece of it? And there are many states trying to figure that out. I've been working a lot in Ohio with their Power Forward initiative, and a lot of what they're trying to do is just that, is how do we enable more of that kind of ability for third parties to be able to participate in the power market.
Excellent. Anyone else want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think this concept of extensibility from a platform that the utility has now. We're working with some clients that have an interesting situation where they're looking at developing a power pool. One of the companies is a public company, it's a co-op, and the other is investor-owned utility. And just seeing the comparison between the two in terms of their technological development and where they're at and the level of sophistication in the processes, you can kind of see the snowballing effect that you'd have with increasing digitization and those that can keep up versus those that can't. So yeah, my perspective would be that it favors those that have already made the move and are a little bit more free to operate.
Interesting.
So if I can take a very
Sure.
quick tangent to that, actually, to extend that conversation a little bit, deregulation or not, the overall value net of the utilities industry is going to change completely in the next 5 or 10 years, right? So if you think about the value net and all the value which are created by the participants in that value net, and think of that as a universe, the customers are going to create wormholes through that universe all over the place. It's because your customers are not going to be your buyers anymore. They are also your suppliers, right? Mm-hmm. They are also substituting your energy supply by participating in energy efficiency and demand response. So going back to your question, there are going to be immense opportunities to co-create value with the customers, and there are going to be significant value that will come from many of these new beyond the electronic business models, and they are going to be supported by the digital technologies that we talk about, irrespective of the regulatory structure.
Great. So we have a couple of questions about the data ownership, right? So as you might expect, there's the concern of how do we protect that data and privacy, and are there security risks, but also then who will own that data? Is it going to be the utilities? Is it going to be Amazon, Google? Is it going to be someone else in the supply chain? Anyone have a perspective?
Well, I can speak for the utilities. The utilities own the data. I mean, it's the consumer's data, and the utilities, they're sort of the stewards of that data. Now, when we're working with other entities, it's a big challenge because there's other companies, very common home products that you would hear. I don't want to name any names, but they're really hard to deal with when it comes to data. And it's in NCEMC, we're the G&T for the state, and we have the distribution co-ops. I mean, we do not see it as data that we own. I mean, it is the consumer's data, and the utilities are the stewards of it. And any data we get is always anonymized. But I think it's an interesting question because there is so much data now. Mm-hmm. And there is valuable studies that can be done on it. So you'd like to be able to anonymize the data and do some work on it so that you can develop the value proposition out of it. But
yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to mention, the Green Button Initiative, I think is what it's called, that's been taking place and evolving over the last several years to figure out how we take this data and identify ways to start unlocking it. So the ability to anonymize it and collect it and standardize what, the nomenclature and the data management around it, how that works, I think is a step towards unlocking some of the value that's mixed in that chain. Now, in terms of the ownership, I think there's a big risk for utilities to be disintermediated from customers, from these third parties who could potentially, create a wedge in between them and start collecting that data and doing something with it.
Yeah, I would completely agree. We enable that data collection, and everything that we interface with is through the utility asking us to develop an interface to that separate system. Now, I talked about Zigbee earlier, where the data is going directly from the meter to something inside the home. That still is utility and consumer controlled. That's not something that we're doing directly to a third party. That's still in the hands of the utility and the consumer's acceptance of that data going into those devices.
Great, so we just got a couple of minutes left, but given that we do have a lot of students in the audience, I would love to hear from you if you have any, if we've piqued the interest of some students today, either resources that you recommend for them to learn more or stay abreast of these developments, or the types of companies, if they really want to be a player in this industry, where you recommend they take a look. Any advice for our students?
I would say go to NCEMC's website. We have a really good program, internship, summer students. We're doing a lot of really innovative projects right now. It's actually a cool company to work for. You know, you think of the utility. I started in the utilities, 25 years ago, and it was kind of a boring place, and it's not that way anymore. I mean, there's a lot of really cool projects that are going on. I mean, the discussions that have happened already today, you think about all the renewables, the energy storage, the discussion of digitisation.
Yeah.
Back in the day, folks, if they were going to get an electrical engineering degree or some type of electrical degree, they would want to go into software because that was way sexier than the utility business. But the utility business has become a much different place. And I would say go to NCEMC's website, look at some of our innovative projects. We love to attract young talent. And also there's a lot of resources online for the utility business, for energy in general.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I would say there's a booming business of trade shows out there and conferences that you can go to attend.
Do you have a favorite conference?
Pardon?
You have a favorite conference?
I do.
Besides this one, of course.
Besides this one. So Distributech is the big conference in the energy industry, and it occurs every year in the, unfortunately, around the Super Bowl time frame. But it's a place that you get to see all of the new technologies that are rolling out and be able to talk to the folks and what they think is happening. And again, 20-some years ago, you'd go to this conference and it was not as nice as it is now when you go. It's really a booming industry. So it's a great time to be in the energy industry.
Awesome.
I think generally I would just say for the non-technical background folks, don't be intimidated by technology projects and learning the technology. Start with this understanding of the capabilities and the processes that make up how this works, and then just learn how modern system architecture works. It's not that difficult to just pick up some of these very simple books that start with, understanding DevOps. And the people that have the technology background that typically dive into the technology, I would say the exact opposite. Learn how to contextualize your problem into a capability model or a process orientation in order to kind of pull yourself out and understand how the technology will be used.
Yeah, just following Jim, I would say, go to Accenture.com. I mean, we do actually.
You all have internships,
we do
right?
have. Yeah, that's great. So we do have deep expertise, across the value chain, if you will, right, from strategy to operations. So you'll get some really good articles to read about in Accenture.com. But then there are, few other places that you can go to. Definitely, some of the conferences like Distributech, but also some websites like EPRI, and also, Edison Electric Institute, EEI. Mm-hmm. So those are some very good resources to, study up and get prepped for your, before you join the workforce.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, we'll leave it there and hopefully talk more internships later, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And please join me in thanking our panelists for today.